Hello and welcome to Heritage House. My name's Jasmine and I'm so glad you're here with me this week. I'm going to be batch baking some sourdough bread. I'm going to do a couple classic boules and some cinnamon raisin bread, which I'm really excited about. This bread, it's super nostalgic for me. We would have it quite a bit growing up, and then I just honestly haven't had it in years. And it's always so great when you can make those nostalgic childhood things at home and really control the ingredients and the quality of what is going in it. So let's jump in and get started. So here I am whipping up both of the doughs. So I'm doing the cinnamon raisin bread in one bowl and then the classic just bowls that I make pretty much every week in the other bowl. And each of these recipes is going to make 2 loaves. So this will last my family and I about 2 weeks or so, maybe a little less depending on when we have people over and share and that kind of thing. So batch cooking is so helpful and you could do more than this. If you wanted extra things, if you wanted to freeze some things, if you have a larger family and just have them, you know? So it's just so much easier when you're able to have all the ingredients out, have all your tools out where you're not having to dirty everything again and again. So it's awesome. Now, when I started out, I didn't do this. I would just stick with one thing until you get familiar. But once you start to get familiar with a recipe or a few recipes, then it's not so hard to add things on. And a lot of times when you're doing bread or baking, a lot of the ingredients are super simple. So it makes it so much easier. And with this, the raisin bread, I'm making the dough. And then the next day is when I add in, the raisins and the cinnamon and the sugar and then the filling and all that. So it breaks it up. So you're not, the day you're making it, you're not tied down to like doing the whole thing. You could just, do it after breakfast or, in between lunch and dinner or just whenever you have a little bit of time and then do your stretch and folds over the next couple, the next hour and a half, 2 hours. And then you just either let it do its thing and ferment or put it in the fridge. And so just so flexible. So this recipe is so good. I'm getting started on it for dinner. It's Swedish meatballs and it turned out amazing. I'll link the recipe for you guys. This was such a cozy meal for winter and just so much flavor. Really, really good. So I'm sauteing the garlic and onions, getting those ready to actually mix in with the meatballs, and
I
you want to
do hear that,
get them
babe.
cooked a little bit before you put those in there. And as those cook, I'm dicing up the parsley to garnish it with and put a little bit in the meatballs and just getting everything going. I love fresh herbs, especially in the winter. They just add a little touch of fresh, and they're obviously just beautiful, um, and so flavorful. And funny, my husband actually just despises mushrooms, but I really like them. So most of the time I'll just omit them from recipes, but occasionally I just want to have some mushrooms. So I cooked these on the side and added them into my portion. And my girls actually loved them. They really liked the sauteed mushrooms. So it's always fun to see how they're gonna react to things and if they're gonna like them. So here I'm mixing everything up. It was one of the main ingredients you put in Swedish meatballs to make them have their distinct flavor is actually nutmeg, which is really interesting. And this recipe called for Parmesan cheese, which really it was good and added in flavor and things like that. And it was just delicious. and then of course breadcrumbs. So here I'm rolling them out, and I kept them pretty small, and I actually held back some of them for my one girl. She is really not into creamy things, so I try to, you know, cater to her where I can without doing a full-blown different meal. And she ended up loving them, so I was really excited about that. This is something you could totally make these and then freeze them and have them ready for another time. Or the recipe also suggested that if you wanted to, you could use store-bought meatballs and just add the nutmeg and things like that into the sauce to make sure it has that flavor. So this is a recipe I will definitely be doing again soon. It turned out so good, and we all enjoyed it. My husband loved it. It has that kind of distinct, almost stroganoff flavor, but a little more unique than that because you add in a little bit of sour cream at the end. And it turned out really, really good. The recipe suggests taking the meatballs and putting them in the fridge for a little bit before you cook them, which I definitely recommend doing that. This, I'm just making a roux now with the butter and the flour, and then you add the meatballs back in, let them cook for a bit, and before everything's done, you add in sour cream. And it was so yummy. This is a combination of beef broth and milk. You can use cream too. It's pretty flexible on how you do that, and then adding in the sour cream and putting the meatballs in, and it was so yummy, so delicious. Totally gonna put this one on repeat. I served it over rice. I mean, you can totally do it over mashed potatoes, or egg noodles are really a classic thing to put it over. And it is really amazing. So, depending on what season you're in, sometimes it's easier just to stick with meals that you don't require a recipe. But this is one that, if you're wanting to look for something new, I would highly recommend it. So it's the next day here, and I am getting some stew beef going in the crock pot to tender up, and I am making some beef and vegetable soup. So I'm getting that going, and I'm going to add some broth and just let it do its thing in the Instant Pot for a little bit so it can be nice and tender, and then I will throw the rest of the soup together. A lot of times lately, I'm really trying to do some dinner prep before lunch, and before lunch, during lunch, that period of time, super, super helpful, especially when you're making like a soup or something like this that is just ready to go, that can be made. It's very, very, very helpful and pretty easy to do on most days. I have a very flexible, spontaneous personality, so I am always kind of trying to tune into the day and what does the day call for. You might have a plan, like you're planning on making this, and then the day comes and you're like, you know what, actually, this is going to be better. I was going to make this today, but we're actually going to have leftovers or something more simple, and I'm going to do that tomorrow. You're just not being rigid, right? Not being rigid. Being rigid can really make things more difficult than they need to be. Like where can we have flexibility? Where can we ebb and flow? That kind of thing. That's really, really, really helpful. I really enjoy working like that. So here I'm just sauteing the carrots onions and celery to really add some flavor to the soup. Get that going. And then I'm going to get these potatoes ready, chopped up. And I actually ended up forgetting to add the garlic in last minute with those veggies in the pan, and I end up sauteing them a little bit later, but it all comes together. Most cooking, outside of a few things, is very forgiving and very, very flexible. So if it's something you're not really used to or in the habit of doing, I just highly recommend just jump in. Try something you really want to learn. Start simple, and you'll be amazed at how you grow into things. My brother's fiance, when I met her, she could hardly cook anything, and now she is like little Betty Crocker. She has cooked so many things and honestly just blows me away all the time with the things that she creates. So just have fun. Cooking is really an art, and it's something that yields just great benefits. And if something doesn't turn out good, it's okay. You try it out the next time, you do something different. You don't make it again if you really don't like it, or you learn, and that's that. But it's just a skill that you will never regret having. I love it. So here is the dough. I ended up actually forgetting to take it out of the fridge before I went to bed the day before. So the plan was I mixed it up earlier in the day, put it in the fridge, and then I was going to take it out and let it do its thing overnight, and I forgot. So I ended up just pulling it out in the morning and sitting it in a warm spot on top of my stove, and cooked it a little later in the day than I usually would, more towards evening dinner time, where I usually like to get my bread baked before lunchtime. But it's flexible and it totally worked. So this is the raisin bread. Added the raisins, which I actually soaked overnight, and just flattened out the dough, stretched it out to a rectangle, and then added it all in, rolled it up, and put it in these greased pans, and sat it back in a warm spot to do its second rise. I cannot recommend this enough. If you like raisin bread, cinnamon raisin bread, this was super fun to make and really, really yummy. Everyone in my family enjoyed it, and I'm gonna definitely be making it again, just like the meatballs. So here it is to do its second rise before I put it in the oven. So I'm going to be shaping the sourdough boules and allowing them to do their second rise. And this is just so convenient to have. Mix up all the dough, cook them, the same day, or you can even separate cooking. Because, like I've mentioned before, sourdough is so flexible. I could have left this in the fridge, for another day and just cooked it a different day, which I've totally done before. And it just adds to that flexibility. But because I made the raisin, I also wanted this, and I ended up freezing one of these just to spread it out a little bit, because I knew with the raisin bread we would not be able to eat these both in a week. So batch cooking, batch baking can be so helpful, and really when we get into rhythms with things, it's just such a time saver, and something I have really gotten in the habit of, and highly, highly recommend. So here I allowed the potatoes to soften and everything to just cook for a while, and then just a few minutes, about 10 minutes or so before I served it, I added in the mixed vegetables, and this was a hit. I will be making all these things again soon because they turned out so well, and with the cold weather, they were cozy and delicious. So there's the raisin bread that just could not keep my family off of. And now I'm going to bake the 2 bowls that I had going. So if you've never done this before, if you want to score the dough, which you need to when you're cooking it in this way, to help make any kind of design you have or scoring kind of pop, you just dust it with flour, and that just helps to give it some contrast so it looks prettier when it's done. And there's all different kinds of ways to score. You can get really fancy. I keep it pretty simple. My favorite is really just this cross, this X cross pattern across the top there, and it always turns out really nicely. I also play around with doing the little wheat one, and that one's really pretty too, but sometimes it busts and all that. But this one is definitely my favorite. So I'm putting it now in a hot, hot, hot preheated cast iron Dutch oven that's been in my oven at 500 for an hour. So it's really, really hot, and that's just all part of getting that crispy crust. So halfway through, you take off the lid and let it finish up, and it just gets this awesome crust on the outside and the soft, chewy inside, and it is so yummy. I've enjoyed being with you this week. If you haven't already, I hope you would take the time to subscribe so you don't miss anything, and I will see you back here next week.